Hi everybody, welcome back to the Green Onion. Again, my name is Jay. I hope you all are very, very well. Today, we're going to be discussing the two most powerful things on this planet. And then some of you may be making some thoughts into what that might be. Well, I'll make this very quick and simple for you. It's perception and reaction. Those two things can cause so much to happen. So essentially, when we get exposed, which happens on a daily basis, to a moment in time, an event, or some kind of situation, we have this internal reaction to start with. That's usually based off of past history, experience, knowledge, exposure to things like media, like TV, radio, even social media, um, even social interaction with friends and family can cause us to mold how we're going to react to those moments in time. The big difference, though, is in what we do with that internal reaction. So, do we immediately bring that to the public, express our opinions right away, or do we dig a little bit deeper and find out more information? So, what I want to do is just a couple exercises. They're very, very straightforward, so I'll just be going over. For one, this is probably one of the most simple ones. So we have an apple. Now on the surface, looks good, looks very nice. If anything, is making me a little bit hungry just looking at it. But on the surface, we don't know what's happening underneath just by looking at it. We actually would need to do a little bit more to gather more information to actually figure out what's happening here. So when you go to a grocery store, you don't actually just say randomly grab a bunch of things and throw it in a bag. No, you actually take the time. In some cases, you're smelling that fruit, feeling it to see, is it firm? Is the skin a little bit loose? Things like that. Is there maybe some bruises and things like that are going on underneath that lets you know that maybe, hey, I don't want to be buying that particular item. So that's something that's very, very straightforward. Is we take the time in our day-to-day life when it comes to, say, things as simple as food, in terms of deciding how we're going to go about choosing which things we're going to consume. But when it comes to events, when it comes to situations in life, we don't necessarily take the time and that same logical line of thought and bring that into the situation and gather more information to figure out what's actually happening. We have this sort of immediate knee-jerk reaction. And for some of us, it may actually go as far as to being quite a bit of an overreaction, where we start to stir up a lot of emotions and potential negative feelings from others because we're spreading that perceived thought, that assumption that is based almost purely on an emotional reaction, instead of one that we've taken the time, we've taken a step back, a breath, and actually break apart what's happening there. Ask questions, look into it more. I mean, if it's a particular individual involved, ask them some questions to try and find out more. Or if it's a particular event, look into it and find out what the truth is behind it. Because in a lot of cases, the truth is something that's far more simple than what you're constructing in your mind during that assumption. So let's take a look at a few pictures here as well. So this is just something else I want to kind of quickly go through. So here in the first image, we see a young woman just kind of laying back, and based off of the expression on her face, just at the very first glance, can we tell what she's thinking, what she's going through? I mean, it could be that she accomplished a lot in her life, and she's kind of going back on those good events that happened that led her to this point. It can be something that she's struggling with, and she's trying to figure out a way around it. She could be somebody that's either very, very depressed or somebody that's very, very content. Very, very difficult to tell here. Then in the next one, we actually have a gentleman who is looking to be a very happy individual, smile on his face, and I mean it seems to be obvious here that he's quite all right. And even the next one that follows here with a woman, the same scenario, smiling, ear to ear, seemingly in a good place in her life. But what we don't realize that's actually happening in a lot of situations, now these are just photos, obviously, these are things that are pre-planned. But what's actually happening in a lot of situations, in some or even possibly even most of the times that you see these people that are outwardly very happy, very extroverted, out there seeming like everything is as good as it can be. What can easily be lurking is that they're doing these things as a mask to help fit in. They don't want to be centered out. They want to just belong and kind of move on with their daily life and not have people, constantly asking them, are you okay? What's wrong? Things like that. Because it's just maybe too much of a burden for them to deal with at the time. Not always the case, obviously. There are some people that are, quite content and feel like they're at a good place in their life, and that's all there is to it. But there are a lot of times where that's not the situation. For one, just recent memory, The Rock. Everybody's pretty darn familiar with the actor. He recently came out talking about his struggles with depression. Now, that's not somebody that when you look at, especially in the films that you've seen him in, I mean, he's very out there, charismatic, full of energy, always looking like he's enjoying himself to the fullest. Yet he's struggling with something internally. So, in a way, the going through these movies and acting that part may have even been therapeutic for him. But the reality of the situation is, even though he looks a certain way, it doesn't mean that's what's actually happening underneath. Another one here, we have a young man who looks like he's actually going through a hard time. We don't actually know. This could be somebody also just exhausted, like they're tired from being physically exerted. They could be dealing with a headache even. And they're somebody that suffers possibly from a migraine. We don't know. This is the whole point of this: is we don't know what's actually happening, what the reality is, without asking questions, without taking the time to try and understand what's happening. If we only apply an emotional response to the situation, then all we're going to get is an emotional response back, and that leads to things like conflict. It leads to deception. It leads to misinformation. It leads to people just being hurt when it's not necessary. One of the big things that we struggle with as a society is now we're at a point where we're almost overexposed. So we're exposed to TV, radio, social media, especially having that kind of instant gratification and being digitally connected. So that actually almost lends itself to jumping to conclusions and assumption, because we have this desire for near instant gratification. One of the biggest things that can lead to assumption, overreaction, is texting. Now, before text messaging, there was, and there still is obviously, but authors writing books, and they'd have their characters state things between themselves, from one character to the next, but they would put descriptors to help us understand how that message was meant to be relayed. Well, with text messaging, we don't have that same thing. And yes, I realize we do have things like emojis, but they're so overly used now that it's almost become white noise. So what is really happening in that message with that person, we don't actually know anymore. And the fact that we get to hide behind this kind of digital screen, and essentially we can do whatever we want. That leads people to assume certain things and not believe certain things because of that environment. It's a lot more genuine when you're face to face. You can actually see the emotion. You can see the body language that tells you, if they're passionate about that situation, if they're angry or upset about that. But you don't really get that coming through in something like a text message. So ultimately, what I'm getting at is, from what you can see over the course of this video, I'm kind of pointing at the very simple fact that we need to ask more questions. We need to interact more, really, on a face-to-face level. That's going to do a lot more for us than anything. Is actually sitting down with people without your devices, and talk to them. Reconnect, because really, we are the most digitally connected, socially disconnected society on the planet. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way that we've kind of evolved, and this need to constantly have this connectivity. That being said, I do hope you enjoyed everything that I've gone over today, and I do hope it maybe opened a couple doors in your mind, open your eyes a little bit into how easily we can overreact to a situation without asking questions, without finding out more information. But ultimately, I want to thank you all for your time, and thanks for watching this video. I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Lots of love. Bye for now.